G'day everybody, it's Danny here from Board Game Sanctuary. I'm a board game hobbyist from Australia who loves sharing my passion for this hobby with my friends, my family, and of course you, the viewers. If you are a brand new person to the board gaming hobby and you've just discovered these games for the first time, then you have come to the right video, my friends, because today I'll be taking you through some of the main types of board games that exist, and hopefully something will jump out and pique your interest and get you started on that board game journey.
Hey Danny, do you want to play a board game?
Yeah, sure.
Well, we do have abstract, deduction, engine building, dungeon crawling, Euro, pattern building, worker placement, fully cooperative, dexterity, and ones with multiple win conditions.
Okay, how about we start with the easy to learn, easy to play beginner type of game first?
You know what? That sounds like an awesome idea.
If you're someone who's exploring board games for the first time, the sheer number of titles that are out there can be incredibly overwhelming. So it can be really hard to sift through which titles might be for you, which titles will be worth your money, and also which titles will be worth your time. One of the first things I started to do when I embarked on this hobby was to look for games that had an appealing theme, something that really connected with my own interests. So I'm a passionate person who loves plants, nature, and all things wildlife, and all things Australian too, actually. And so I kind of searched for games that kind of featured animals, like Wingspan, or even included a cool fantasy storyline that I could kind of role play through. Those elements are things that really help me to connect with the game itself, and it's really important that you connect with the board game that you're playing. You're not purely just getting it because everyone else said it's popular. You're getting it because there's something in the game that really reaches into your soul and says, you know what? This is a puzzle worth solving. A game that can get you excited is better than trying to pursue a game which might be really high up on the Board Game Geek rank. Now, whilst initially when I started getting into this hobby, I was drawn to a game's theme, there was a category of games that has recently really lured me in a lot deeper than I ever could imagine before. And it's a category called Euro games. And Euro games are basically games that don't have a huge amount of player luck. They have players kind of doing their own system or creating their own little engine. It's usually centered around an economy system where you're gathering resources, trading those resources to kind of fulfill different objectives that are either completely public to everyone or specific to your own tableau. Euro games are really great because it allows you to build your own machine. It allows you to kind of carve your own way to victory. Whilst Euro games often look quite abstract to begin with, they're actually quite involved in terms of how much you can kind of build your game strategy centered around certain goals that are laid out. A lot of Euro games often involve moving counters up tracks. You might have to collect sets of items. Sometimes it involves card placement or tile placement. There is a very low level of luck that's involved in Euro games. Whilst they might use dice, those dice that are incorporated into Euro games are often used to either power up items or give you a certain value of a resource depending on the pip value that's shown on a die. So Euro games thematically are centered around either a location around the world or maybe a core theme. And at first when I heard the term Euro game, I thought, are Euro games just games about Europe? And you know, I was a little bit foolish for thinking that, whilst it kind of makes sense in retrospect. But the idea of a Euro is that it's more centered around the mechanics of how the game works rather than the theme itself. But there is a new blend of games coming out, which as games are evolving all the time, thematic Euros are games which kind of sit in between. The idea that they're very Euro-centered in terms of how the games work, but they really try to emulate the theme that they're presenting, which I really like because it's like almost like a subset category of Euros that are out there. Now, if Euros are not your flavor, on the other side of the spectrum, you have board games that are really heavily themed. They're centered around the story, a cool combat system, or maybe building up a dice pool and chucking those dice to see whether your characters succeed or fail in their quest. There is another category of games out there called Ameritrash, which I don't know if that term is actually a good way to describe them, but basically it just means games that are full of combat, story-driven, relies heavily on the dice roll, so there's a huge luck factor into the game, but it's the thrill of the dice roll and leveling up your characters and pursuing a cool character story arc that makes those games really shine and enjoyable. I do have a few games in my collection that are dungeon crawling in style that kind of have that Ameritrash feel to them. Whilst I'm more of a Eurogamer at heart, I do enjoy dungeon crawling games that do have a puzzly element to them. So one of my first games that I ever got was a game called Mice and Mystics. It comes with this really cool campaign book which tells you different scenarios and story moments that you can set up using the modular boards that comes with the game. And then as you enter new rooms, there's new ways to set up the game, as well as new story elements to explore, as well as new minions to defeat. And there's this element of not knowing what you're going to encounter next and how you're going to band together as a group and decide how you're going to overcome the challenges in the game and pursue your character's dreams and aspirations that makes these thematic Eurotrash games brilliant. I also have this game called Zombicide, which is a really tough cooperative game where literally, as the title suggests, zombies, hordes of them, are literally heading your way and trying to absolutely obliterate you. It is probably one of the most tense games I've ever played, with some very strange rules, which I might say for another video, but the idea that you're trying to get rid of these zombies, you're trying to get equipment and craft weapons and trying to get to your goal, just makes for such a great fun experience. Whilst there isn't a puzzle to solve per se, but there is that sense that you feel like you are part of this world. You feel like you're part of the character's world and you are exploring their lives through their shoes. And that's what makes Ameritrash games so good. The thrill of the dice roll and the embodiment of the character you're controlling. There is another category of games that I've often really enjoyed having in my collection, mainly at the smaller level, and they are abstract board games. Abstract games are really fun because a lot of these abstract games relies heavily on the player's skill. There is almost zero luck, zero randomness, and it all comes down to how players set up their position and how they exploit their position to advance their strategy. I love abstract games because they really test your wits and your ability to outwit and outplay the other opponent. Sounds like an episode of Survivor, doesn't it? Some of my favorite games are games like Hive, where you're moving these insects which have special abilities so you can surround your opponent's queen bee. You've also got games like Reef, where you're building a pattern and trying to satisfy objectives based on the way your reef is carved out. Abstract games, whilst a lot of them feel like they don't have a theme, are becoming more thematic over time. And I really am enamored by how brilliant some of the level of depth that does come with a cool abstract game. Like even the game Santorini has you building the city of Santorini in 3 dimensions. That leveled but geographical evolution of abstract games is something that is well worth exploring. And if you like chess, and I know chess is not everyone's cup of tea, there are games that have really taken the core idea and the abstractness of chess and really taken into more approachable directions. Now, when I first embarked in this hobby, I thought all board games were competitive. That means you were playing to win. When I first discovered Pandemic, I realized, wow, there is a whole new category of games out there called fully cooperative games, where all the players actually work together against a system, and that is the system that the game is throwing at you. So it could be, battling diseases across the world and taking on the role of different epidemiologists as you try and control viral outbreaks, or it could be fighting a beast, or it could be exploring a haunted house and vanquishing the ghosts. Cooperative games really reshaped how I thought board games should be played. I always thought that there would be only one winner when you play a board game, but actually when you work together and you open up discussions about how you solve a problem as a team and as a collective group against the game system itself, cooperative games can be superbly fun. They can range from the most simple cooperative games like Hanabi as you launch fireworks into the air, to the most complex cooperative games where you're trying to scare off colonizers from your island in Spirit Island. Cooperative games really has great value in this modern board gaming world because it teaches teamwork, cooperation, collaboration, empathy for other people. And cooperative games are just so great to enjoy, especially if you are not a super competitive person or you don't like that feeling of losing. Cooperative games allows you to feel like you are part of a group. When I heard that some board games were described as dexterity games, I thought, are they games that I have to do cartwheels, backflips, somersaults, or even this funny little trick that I used to learn as a kid? But actually, dexterity games are a little bit more strategic than one might think. Yes, whilst we've all played games like Jenga, where you try and pull out blocks and try and not make the tower collapse, dexterity games have really become a whole lot more thematic. Dexterity games like Tokyo Highway, where you're using paddle pop sticks to build highways over and under each other's highways to lay out cars and score points. And games like Men at Work, where you're trying to stack all these cool little builders and cross beams and balance things, just creates a cool geographical puzzle. One of my favorite dexterity games is called Junk Art because you get to visit different cities around the world and there are different competitions for creating really cool sculptures out of this whole cool collection of pieces that you're given. Dexterity games not only test your dexterity skills, which is your ability to balance things, your ability to do things with your hands and your mind, but actually there's a lot of strategy behind it. And it really taps into an area of your brain that you don't normally associate with when you're thinking about board games. Now, there are some board games that really require a huge level of investment. That means they don't really just want you to play the game once, but they want you to play the game several times over several sessions and really see a huge story arc play out. There is a type of board game out there called legacy games, which features campaigns that players embark in and save their progress each and every time they play. One of my favorite legacy games is Pandemic Legacy Season 1, where you start off with a regular game of Pandemic, but then new rules, new stickers, and new changes are introduced into the game itself each and every month that it changes the way the board and the game feels. Legacy games does require you to commit to several campaigns or several sessions that are all interconnected. And the idea that the board changes and evolves as you play the game means that a lot of the decisions you make have a consequential and long-term impact on the game. What I do like about legacy games is that you really get to explore a game in a different way every single time you play. There is one caveat though, that you cannot go back and reset the game back to its original state. And so legacy games feel like you've read a trilogy of books where once you get to the end, you've explored every facet of that story. One of my favorite games to play with the hubby are engine building games. And you might think, oh, does that mean you're playing board games in your car, or board games while you're fixing your car, or board games while you're at the mechanic waiting for your car to be fixed? No, engine building games are games where you've got pieces of a system that you can kind of draft and put together into a tableau, which is basically like your board area. And every time you do an action, that little system starts activating. So it might be adding an egg to a bird card, or it might be moving a bird card to another spot so that it gets a particular bonus for you, or it might be storing cards underneath other bird cards. Games like Wingspan and Gizmos are games that give me that great engine building feeling. There's a game that I actually even have in my collection called Steampunk Rally, where basically you are literally building a vehicle using all these vehicle part cards. You're putting dice on them and then using those dice to power your vehicle to race along a racetrack against the other players. And whoever builds the best vehicle and powers it the most efficiently will get to the finish line first. And that's such a beautiful thematic connection. The next category of games is probably one that I initially really liked when I first started this hobby, but then now I've kind of drifted off my radar, mainly because they require a big group of people who are willing to let their personalities fly a little bit, and it is social deduction games. Deduction games like Secret Hitler, The Resistance, Avalon, all give players a certain role to play, whether hidden or public, and then using those roles, they need to kind of manipulate the situation and interrogate other people to fulfill an objective. These games definitely make me feel uncomfortable, but they definitely serve a purpose and place in big social gatherings and party settings, which can often be used to break the ice. So I can definitely see the positives of social deduction games. I like a social deduction game that's a little bit more structured, one where the social element is only a slice of the bigger game. So I have this really cool game in my collection called Insider, which is like 20 questions. It gives everyone a role, but the focus of the game isn't the roles themselves, it's trying to guess the word that the master word giver is giving. And I feel like that shifts the focus from the social deduction to word deduction. And so social deduction games definitely are for a certain group or type of people, and they definitely work when you have the right mindset going in, but they do involve investing your personality into a game and also being not afraid to get your feelings hurt sometimes when someone betrays you, which you thought you trusted in real life. There's a category of games that I really like playing with my friends, and that is where you're given clues to try and solve a puzzle. You might be given half of the puzzle's solution and you need to share your half with the other person, or it might be simply piecing and connecting the dots together. This category of games is called Deduction Games, whether it be solving a crime or mystery or finding out the position of a treasure on a treasure map, or it could even be seriously just trying to find out some creature that's hidden on this giant hex map in a game called Cryptid. I love deduction games because it taps into that puzzly element in my brain. And if you haven't realized so far, I just love puzzles. Especially there's this really cool series called the Exit Game series, which kind of emulates like an escape room experience. I just love configuring puzzles, trying to approach puzzles and solve puzzles. Puzzle. Basically, deduction games are great because I just love the post-game discussions that you can have, because you could be like, oh, this is what I initially thought about what was happening in this crime story, or I thought this was my theory of how I envision this story to unfold. And then when you compare your stories and your theories and your solutions, it just really creates for such a fun bonding experience. And then it just really gives you that motivation to just want to play again. The next type of board game actually centers around one of the most popular mechanics used in Eurogames. And I guess one argument could be that this is a mechanic and not a type of game, but because there's so many games that use this feature alone, I kind of decided to include it on this list, and it is the worker placement games. Worker placement games are some of my favorite style of Euro games to play, because basically they give you all these little workers and you put them out on the board, and whichever place you put them out on, you get this particular benefit, resource, or action. Games like Everdell allows you to put these little critters out in the woods, and they give you resources that you can trade in to obviously purchase buildings and build your own little village. When you place a worker out, it stops or blocks that space from anyone else from using that same space. And there's so many games that have taken that core concept and twisted it, expanded it, and pulled it into different directions. And so worker placement games really is about taking what you want now, being opportunistic about it, but then denying other players the ability to use that space or action or benefit for a short period of time. When people think of board games, they often think of cards and playing cards and using cards, acquiring cards, tapping cards. And so this type of game that I often like to play and explore is called deck building games. Deck building games are games that allow you to build your deck as you play them. And so often deck building games will often give you like a starter deck. So games like Dominion, Lost Ruins of Arnak, Star Realms, these are games which you have a core deck that you begin with, which is kind of like a basic deck. And then throughout the game, you can purchase other cards and decide how your deck might evolve and play out. It might be a deck that's focused on movement, or it might be a deck that's focused on building. And so if you acquire those cards and build your deck as you go, as you play your deck out each and every turn, that deck yields rewards for your game strategy. I like them because you have a lot of control and creativity about the synergy and the combos that kind of are contained within your deck. And so in one game you might think, oh, my deck was a little bit clunky, but in the next game I'm gonna really go all in on this particular card type and use that to build a strategy, and then seeing that strategy play out and testing the efficiency of that strategy against another player who's built a different type of deck just makes for such a fun and engaging experience. Now, I've barely scraped the surface of all the different types of board games that are out there, and I'm sure that as board game design and development becomes better and more advanced, we're going to see new types of board games appearing on the market. But I hope that this video has given you a point in the right direction in terms of what sort of type of board game you might be interested in when it comes to starting your first board game collection. Now, if you found this video super helpful, please consider giving me a like and subscribing to my channel. I do have some other beginner videos on my main page. If you click onto my beginner video playlist, you'll see all of those videos contained there. This is Danny signing out. Thank you once again for joining me. I'll see you in my next video, and I hope your next board game is a fun one. See you soon.